hello there. There really aren't that many churches in England that you can go and visit and which present the appearance that they did when first built in the Saxon period. But this is one of them, the Church of Stow in Lincolnshire. In common with our houses, churches have often had their doors and windows replaced. So although most of the doorways and window embrasures in this church date from the early Norman period, they are set into Saxon walls, built from about 1040 onwards. Once you're inside, the scale of this building is amazing. Look at these huge Saxon arches. Of course, the pointed arch is dating from the 14th century, and beyond that, the vaulted chancel was a rebuild of the 12th century. But this is a majestic church, and I think one of the most spectacular in the country. In the transepts, it's possible to see the way in which the wall is constructed. That is, with roll mouldings of dressed stone, but with rubble in between. This is something that was only used in the very earliest periods of church building. As we look back into the nave, just look at the proportions of the building, how tall the walls are compared to the width of the building. And this is, again, a very typical Saxon indication, whether it's in really early Saxon churches from the 7th century or right up to the 11th century, which is the date of this building. In the 12th century, the chancel was almost doubled in size, and today it's a spectacular space with its blank wall arcading. What we're looking at here is some of the very earliest graffiti in an English church, dating from the 10th or 11th century. And you see that this is a Viking longboat. This part of England, of course, had traditionally been linked with Scandinavia, and so it's little surprise that it's one of their boats we find on this wall. It's surprising how many other things of interest this church contains. On the floor in front of me is a 13th century stone coffin lid. In this part of England, these coffin lids usually have a representation of the deceased, head and shoulders portrait, if you like, in a circular recess. But in addition, this one has an inscription around the edge in what's known as Lombardic lettering, which tells us that this is the grave of Emma, the wife of Fulk. This archway is part of the original Saxon church, and you can see its proportions. The height is tremendous in comparison to its width, and very typical of work of the 10th century. Just look at these two musicians. They're not part of the Saxon church, they come in a later period, but aren't they fantastic? The position of rood screens in churches is often difficult to determine, especially in a cruciform church like this. But if we look up, you can see here some changes in the stonework. And this must have been where the fixing for the rood loft went in. And in fact, if we go round the corner, we can actually see the stairs that led to the top of the rood loft. Here they are in the angle of the crossing arch and the chancel. And if you look very carefully, you can see that the two hinges that once supported the door still survive. Only officials from the church were allowed access to the rood loft. In the nave of the church, these medieval bench ends date from the 15th century, And you can see how they have a platform so that the area inside that ledge could be filled with straw, so that those sitting in the benches had a form of insulation on their feet, which didn't then spill out into the nave itself. One of the slightly more recent aspects of the church is this 13th century font, and I particularly like this foliate head facing the southeast corner. We also have here a dragon, or perhaps a salamander, biting its own tail, a symbol of everlasting life. Whilst at the base is a demon, its life being extinguished by the very weight of the font above. So to sum up, Stow Church is one of the most magnificent late Saxon or early Norman parish churches in this country. It hasn't changed very little at all, apart from a restoration by the Victorians. It also contains some fantastic fittings: medieval benches, wall paintings, carvings and memorials. And I would put it in my top 50 churches in England. I hope you've enjoyed having a quick look at it with me today, and that you'll be able to come and see it for yourself. Thank you very much.